The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the city washed in a quiet that felt borrowed rather than earned. The streets were still wet, reflecting pale streetlights like tired eyes that refused to close. In a narrow apartment, on the fourth floor of a building, most people passed without noticing. A man named Daniel Cole sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. They were steady now, but he remembered when they used to shake every morning, when waking up itself felt like a punishment. Daniel was 36, though grief had added years to his face. His life had not collapsed all at once. It had eroded slowly like stone under constant water. A broken childhood, a marriage that ended not with shouting, but with silence. A daughter he loved more than his own breath. Now living across the city with a mother who no longer trusted him to be stable, and beneath all of it, the quiet, relentless ache of memories he never spoke about. He worked nights cleaning office buildings downtown. It paid little, but it was honest, and it kept him invisible. Invisibility had become his shield. When people didn't look at him, they couldn't ask questions. They couldn't see the fractures running through him like hairline cracks in glass. On this particular morning, Daniel hadn't slept. He had tried, lying still as the hours dragged on. But his mind kept returning to the same place. A memory from years ago, sharp and uninvited. The sound of tires, the scream that followed, the moment that split his life into before and after. He stood up, pulled on a jacket, and left the apartment without turning on the light. The city was just beginning to breathe again. A few buses groaned awake. A bakery opened its doors, releasing warmth and the smell of bread into the cold air. Daniel walked without direction, letting his feet decide, until he found himself standing in front of a small storefront he had passed many times but never entered. The sign was simple. No bright promises, no exaggerated claims, just a name painted in soft blue, letters in a single word. Beneath it that made him pause. Healing. He almost kept walking. Almost. But something in his chest tightened, the way it did when he ignored a wound for too long. Before he could talk himself out of it, he opened the door and stepped inside. The room was warm and quiet, filled with muted light. Shelves of books lined one wall. A small fountain whispered in the corner. Sitting behind a desk was a woman, in her early 40s, with calm eyes and a presence that didn't demand attention but held it. She didn't ask why he was there. She didn't rush him. She simply looked at him and said, "You look like someone who's been carrying too much for a very long time." Something in Daniel broke then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that he had to sit down. The words he had swallowed for years pressed against his throat. He didn't cry. He just nodded. Her name was Evelyn. She explained what she did without pressure, without guarantees. She spoke about the mind as if it were not an enemy, but a place that had learned to survive in difficult ways. She told him that pain, when ignored, doesn't disappear. It waits. Daniel didn't know why he agreed. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe hope, thin and fragile as it was, had finally found a crack to slip through. The first session was not dramatic. No swinging watches, no loss of control. Just a chair, a calm voice, and permission to close his eyes without fear. Evelyn guided him gently, asking him to breathe, to notice the weight of his body, to feel the ground supporting him. At first his thoughts resisted. Memories flared up like warning signals, but her voice was steady, patient. She didn't force him forward. She reminded him that he could stop at any time, that nothing would happen without his consent. And slowly something shifted. He found himself standing in a version of his past, but this time he was not drowning in it. He was observing it from a distance that felt safe. He saw the younger man he had been, overwhelmed and unprepared, making choices from pain instead of clarity. Instead of judgment, he felt something unfamiliar, compassion. Session by session, Daniel returned. Some days were harder than others. Some days he left feeling raw and exposed. But other days he noticed changes so small he almost missed them. He slept through the night. He laughed at something on the radio and realized it had been weeks since he last had. He began to understand that healing was not about erasing the past. It was about changing the way it lived inside him. Outside the therapy room, life continued to test him. His ex-wife remained cautious. His job remained exhausting. Money remained tight. But Daniel was no longer collapsing under the weight of everything at once. He learned how to sit with discomfort without letting it consume him. One evening, after a particularly intense session, he walked home under a sky heavy with clouds. He felt tired but not hollow. For the first time in years, the city didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a place he existed in, rather than survived. Weeks turned into months. Daniel began writing again, something he had abandoned long ago. Not for anyone else, just for himself. Words became a way to release what he no longer wanted to store in silence. The day his daughter agreed to spend an afternoon with him, he nearly canceled out of fear. But he didn't. They went to the park. They talked about small things. Ice cream melted faster than expected. She laughed when it dripped onto his shoe. And in that moment, Daniel realized that healing wasn't a single breakthrough. It was a series of choices. To stay present, to stay kind, to stay. On his last session with Evelyn, she asked him how he would describe the difference between the man who first walked into her office and the man sitting there now. Daniel thought for a long time. Then he said, he's the same person. He just doesn't hate himself anymore. When he stepped back into the street, the air felt lighter. Not because life had become easy, but because he was no longer carrying it alone. Years later, Daniel would tell his story to no one in particular. Not as advice, not as instruction, but as proof that pain does not define a person. Proof that the mind, when treated with patience instead of punishment, can learn new ways to protect without destroying. And on quiet mornings, when the city was just waking up and the streets still held reflections of old light, Daniel would breathe deeply and feel something he once thought was gone. Forever. Peace.